Right now, I do want to bring in Ryan Schmelz with Fox News Radio to talk much more about the shutdown in general. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Of course, always great to be on.
And I did want to ask you overall, for folks who have been watching this kind of play out over the last several hours and maybe aren't familiar with exactly how we got to this point, can you break all of that down for folks who are watching right now?
Yeah, I would say that this was a process that could have been avoided, but there's a lot of guardrails here. So it started back in January when Republicans first took office. There was a government funding battle they had to deal with then. That was in March. So after that was dealt with, a lot of the Senate's floor time from there was eaten up with dealing with confirming President Trump's nominees. They also spent a lot of time on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And by the time all of that was completed, next thing you know, we're up against a government funding deadline. So Republicans decided to put together a stopgap measure, which was a simple extension of government funding until November 21st. But Democrats have said that's just simply not good enough for them, and they've put their foot in the ground when it comes to health care. And they've been asking for certain health care provisions in order to get them to a yes, to get the 60 votes needed to break the filibuster and ultimately pass this thing.
Does it appear at this point that folks on either side are willing to budge? I'm sure you've spoken with quite a few lawmakers out there. We've heard from them throughout the day, and it seems as though the answer is no.
No, to an extent, right? You have 3 Democrats who voted with all but 1 Republican last night and today on that same stopgap measure that Republicans have been pushing. There was thoughts and there were conversations going on with some other Democrats to see if they'd be willing to flip and ultimately come to a yes. Republicans set out today to try to find those 5 Democrats. They were not successful when they just had a vote a few minutes ago. So it looks like they are back to the drawing board. Republicans have said they're willing to put this thing on the floor over and over again until they get enough yeses from Democrats. But so far, they haven't been successful in flipping anyone outside of those 3 I just mentioned.
What government services are impacted right now? Because that's another question that we've received from so many different folks out there who do have these questions. What can you tell me about what specifically is impacted now and maybe what isn't?
Well, right now you're seeing federal workers not receiving their paychecks, and you're also seeing non-essential government services shut down for the time being. So national parks, federal buildings that are deemed non-essential, they're not going to be operating right now. But I think the one thing you have to notice and how this could have a huge ripple effect that could impact the rest of the country is with the federal employees not getting money. Look at TSA agents. You know, there could be a point when, if they're not receiving paychecks, they stop coming to work. And if they stop coming to work, or at least a good portion of them stop coming to work, that's going to have a ripple effect that impacts the economy. It impacts how we travel. It could really have a domino effect that could hit nationwide.
My last question for you here, what exactly should Americans be watching for? You touched on this there, but as all this progresses over the next several hours and days, what do Americans need to be watching for? What are the next steps here?
Well, I think there's a couple of things we could be watching for. Number one, are Republicans going to be successful in flipping 5 Democrats and getting the current bill that's on the table to 60 votes and ultimately on a path towards passing? If that happens, I mean, the government shutdown's over. The government will be reopened. It'll be funded until November and problem solved. Or you could watch to see if Republicans ultimately decide to come to the negotiating table and work on some type of compromise agreement with Democrats. But right now, it just seems like both sides are really dug into their trenches outside of a couple Democrats who've been willing to flip over and vote for this bill so far. But as of right now, no progress today.
All right, Ryan Schmelz, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break it all down. We definitely appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.